When Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities arrived on Netflix, it garnered a lot of praise and attention, and rightly so. It has its misses, but it's a collection of horror stories that almost all pass the bar of being entertaining, watchable horror. It's a lot of fun. If you haven't watched it yourself, consider this a recommendation. But amongst the episodes, I think most agree that one really stands out. Maybe not as being objectively better, not for everyone, but as being objectively singular. And whatever you thought of that episode, whether you fell in love with it instantly, liked it to an extent, or bounced off it completely, it's the one you'll remember, and, in my opinion, the one most worth discussing. From its self-described, hard-to-pinpoint retro-futuristic style,
it made me nostalgic for things that never happened,
to its playful preference for thematics over narrative substance, it has proven to be the most divisive episode of a series that has largely not divided opinion. But before we do talk about the viewing, let's talk about its creator, Panos Cosmatos, and where better to start than with his father. George P. Cosmatos was an Italian filmmaker who came to mainstream attention with the runaway train disaster flick The Cassandra Crossing, featuring an all-star cast including Richard Harris, Sophia Loren, and O.J. Simpson. The Cassandra Crossing is also, coincidentally, one of the first films I can remember seeing as a child. And although young me found it exciting and scary, enough that I vividly remember my horror at the climactic crash, it is a film that does not hold up at all well today. From there, Cosmatos moved on to bigger budget Hollywood films, like the well-received western Tombstone, the balls-to-the-wall action blockbuster Rambo, First Blood Part 2, and the bizarro cult classic Cobra. But his career was dogged by the suggestion that he didn't actually direct the films himself, but instead served as a pliable doormat or gopher for their stars, Sylvester Stallone or Kurt Russell, who were directors in all but name. I don't know if any of that is true, and it certainly wouldn't be beyond the realm of possibility that someone like Stallone just took credit for things he didn't do, as when he attempted to get a co-writing credit on the novel Fair Game, because he later adapted it into the film Cobra. Sorry, Sly, that's not how that works. Panos followed his father into the director's chair, and whatever criticisms were levelled at Cosmatos Sr., there is absolutely no doubt that Panos' work is his own singular vision. Panos' first film, 2012's Beyond the Black Rainbow, revels in its retrofuturism, a time capsule from a time that never existed, dipped in cinematic hallucinogen, at turns hypnotic and exhilarating, hung over the threadbare plot of a scientist experimenting on a young girl who begins to develop psychic powers, is a parable of the greatest monsters of our time, boomers.
They didn't stop when their forces exceeded all requirements of a legitimate defensive capability, and they haven't stopped now.
Disdaining the generation that came before, leaving them to silently rot, while using the remnants of their good intentions to control the next generation, and attempting to mold that generation into their own image.
And I know who you are too, Lena. I can guide you towards that.
Masking the unhappiness that drives them through fast cars, unconvincing cosmetic enhancements, and prescription drugs. Beyond the Black Rainbow lives or dies on your receptiveness to its aesthetic. But it marked Cosmatos' arrival as a bold and original filmmaker, certainly not happy to churn out meaningless blockbusters or cede control of his creative voice. But sadly, it was an arrival that not many noticed. Cosmatos' next film was 2018's Mandy, a heady brew of 70s revenge flick, post-apocalyptic action movie, and Ralph Bakshi's psychedelia, where Nick Cage's Red takes revenge on a religious cult for the murder of his wife, the titular Mandy, played by Andrea Riseborough. You could argue that Mandy falls into the trope of fridging, killing a female character to motivate a male character onto a vengeful killing spree. And that would be fair. I would suggest, however, that Mandy herself is the core of the film, and the whole thing is an allegory anyway. Red hasn't lost a romantic partner. He has lost his whole world. Nick Cage's Red, a name that alludes to the simple homespun values of the traditional Republican voter,
You're a vicious snowflake.
is just another victim of the corrupted inversion of a Christ figure, who rather than dying for the sins of others, chooses to punish others for his own sins.
You know what Jesus' big mistake was? Huh? He didn't offer up a sacrifice instead.
Which does not make this a religious film, but rather a film criticizing organized religion. More specifically, the neoconservative Christian New Right.
So what you hunting?
Jesus freaks.
The so-called moral majority of evangelicals who grew in prominence through their close ties to the political project of Ronald Reagan.
There's a great spiritual awakening in America. A renewal of the traditional values that have been the bedrock of America's goodness and greatness. An overwhelming majority of Americans disapprove
And now hold a power that enables them to use their faith as a means to fund their capitalist excesses, under the guise of prosperity gospels and mega churches. Here they are cast as a Manson family-esque cult, selling their souls to the devil in exchange for the satisfaction of their own desires. This functions as a metaphor for evangelicals who preach alongside the more traditional reactionary and regressive talking points of the Christian right. Climate change denial. Maybe because they believe in the end of days, or maybe because it further fattens their pockets. Who could be more worthy of the wrath of a grindhouse-style apocalyptic revenge flick than those who would literally bring the apocalypse? With the viewing, episode 7 of Guillermo del Toro's horror anthology, Cabinet of Curiosities, Cosmatos again gives us a fairly simplistic narrative in which a small group, Steve Agee's writer, Michael Terrio's psychic, Charlene Yee's scientist, and a musician played by Eric Andre, seemingly cosplaying as Boots Riley from The Coup, are invited to a viewing of an unknown object by a wealthy recluse played by Peter Weller. In terms of socio-political themes, the viewing isn't quite as focused as Cosmatos' 2 features. That isn't to say they aren't there, and he hasn't forgotten who the boogeyman is.
Oh, a man of peace. I bet you're voting for Carter.
Of course, despite this reputation as a relative peacenik, it was Carter who in 1980 brought into being the Carter Doctrine, the foundation of US foreign policy ever since, whereby the economic interests of American business overseas, particularly relationships with petrostates, would be protected by the full might of the United States military.
Voting. Yikes.
It could be read as the evolution of the mega-rich.
Really? That's a little dramatic. There's plenty of rich, powerful people that nobody knows about.
No longer just happy to exist in their gilded towers, indulging their wildest fantasies in private.
I have seen things that would make you shit your mind, Kimosabi.
But instead looking to use their power to contort the whole world into being their plaything.
Perhaps control of the machinery is a real ambition.
And ultimately metamorphosing into a monstrosity that will go on to wreak untold damage. Again, perhaps a nod toward the Carter Doctrine and Reagan's more aggressive corollary, which tied the American state ever more closely to the oil and arms industries and has led directly, under various guises, to over 40 years of conflict overseas and demonizing of minorities domestically. Perhaps it is also telling that his assistants, Sofia Boutella's Dr. Zara and Saad Siddiqui's Hector, both appear to be fugitives from revolution themselves, and are among the first to fall at the hands of this newly forged monstrosity. But the level I think it works best on is if you look at it more as a meta-commentary, a dialogue Cosmatos is having with himself about you, the viewer of his work. One of the main criticisms I have seen from viewers who didn't like the viewing is that it seems to end at the culmination of the first act, with many seemingly keen to find out what happens next. To that, I would say, you've seen that story. You've seen it thousands of times, and you will likely see it thousands more. The creature kills a bunch of people, and then it gets stopped, or it doesn't. If you want a creature feature, there are plenty. Knock yourself out. Cosmatos didn't tell that story, maybe because he was more interested in the origin, or maybe because it didn't interest him at all. This is instead the story of one man, his specific and obscure tastes, and others who are chosen to gaze upon them, the people he invites to set eyes on this unique and unusual treasure for the very first time, an object that defies all standard means of description, that is seemingly impossible to comprehend.
No, really, what is this thing?
Beats me.
Other, perhaps more interesting stories are snatched from the viewer, such as who these people even are.
So you're a scientist?
No, but you have no idea how much money it takes to be this rich.
Or the origin of the golden AK-47, a story so powerful it moves Hector to tears, but a story we will never see. Any analysis of who constructed what you were looking at is brushed away.
The architect is no one whom anyone has ever heard of or ever will.
You, the viewer, want a solid explanation of what this is. But it turns to goo in your hands, or makes your head explode. You can't have it. Just the style. Just what he likes. At the climax, he merges with the object, and together they become a monster, unleashed onto the world. You don't know what he is going to do next, but you want to know. And that is what the viewing truly is. A calling card on a widely viewed platform. For a viewer, Cosmatos niche films haven't reached yet. A unique and impossible object you can't make head nor tail of, demanding as much of you as you are of it.
You think you're looking at it, but it's looking at you.
And hopefully, those viewers will want to know what he does next. Which isn't to say Cosmatos is entirely confident you are going to like it.
I have no idea how this next one will be received.
What's the concept?
It sounds ludicrously simple, but it's one word. Fantasy. Yeah, it's gonna fucking flop.
It's guaranteed to be a hit.
And I hope it is, because the world needs more unique and interesting filmmakers like Panos Cosmatos. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, share and subscribe if you would like to see more of this sort of content.